Boris Johnson has been in Germany, urging the world not to look away from the crisis in Ukraine. From there, he returns to the UK and to Westminster, where tomorrow he will sweep away most remaining COVID regulations. These are big decisions, but the police have a big decision of their own as they consider whether or not the Prime Minister broke those COVID rules that he put in place. This morning, we'll hear what he has to say. With pressing issues looming for the government at home and abroad, I've been speaking to the Prime Minister about Ukraine, COVID and the inquiry into what did and didn't happen at Downing Street during lockdown. With most remaining COVID rules set to be lifted, will Labour's Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting support the government or urge caution? The classicist Dame Mary Beard draws parallels with the ancient world on subjects ranging from stormy weather to images of powerful women. She joins me live. And reviewing the papers this morning and to look ahead to a busy week in politics, the political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa, Crerar, and the deputy political editor of The Spectator, Katy. But first, the news with Lakshmi Gopal.
Sophie, thank you. Good morning. The Prime Minister has told this programme a Russian invasion of Ukraine could spark the biggest war in Europe since 1945. His warning comes amid fresh concerns from the US that Moscow could launch an attack on Ukraine at any time.
I'm afraid to say that the plan that we're seeing is for something that could be really the biggest war in Europe since 1945, just in terms of sheer scale.
The full interview with the Prime Minister will be coming up shortly with Sophie. The legal requirement to self-isolate after testing positive for COVID in England is expected to be dropped from next week as part of the government's Living with COVID plan. All remaining virus restrictions in England are also set to end in the coming days, but Labour has warned against declaring victory before the war is over. More wet and windy weather is set to sweep across the UK today after Storm Eunice caused what energy providers believe was the biggest national power outage on record. Tens of thousands of households remain cut off, and with more weather warnings in place today, the clean-up could be slow. And yes, it's finally happened on the final day of the Winter Olympics. Well, that's all from me. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Sophie.
Lakshmi, thank you very much. Now, let's look at the front pages of the papers this morning, starting with The Observer. West plans to arm resistance if Russian forces occupy Ukraine. The Sunday Telegraph. Britain warned of cyber attacks as Russia flexes military might. The Sunday Times has a big story on wealthy donors with the Prime Minister's ear. We'll be talking about that a lot more in a moment. The Sunday Express, defiant Boris will axe all COVID rules, they say. The Sunday Mirror, the special investigation, a Home Office probes racist staff WhatsApp group. The Mail on Sunday focuses on Nick Clegg, ministers hunt for Nick Clegg, Facebook spies. And finally, The Sun on Sunday, Prince Andrew, a new pedo-suicide storm. So those are the front pages. And to discuss what's in the papers with me this morning, Pippa Crerar and Katy. Lovely to have both of you in the studio with us again. So let's start with the Mirror, Pippa.
Yeah, so my colleague Chris Hughes, our defence editor, is out in Ukraine, one of many newspapers to have a presence out there trying to find out what's going on the ground. And Chris has been speaking off on the front line to people that are sort of caught up. Boris Johnson obviously made that speech yesterday in Munich in which he talked about the potential bloody impact of any conflict. And Chris has been talking to people on the Ukrainian side of the border who are clearly very concerned about this. His report really goes in on the fact that the war is already in motion, that there has been a series of what we call false flag attacks in eastern Ukraine, that there's been shelling trying to provoke a reaction, that Russian special forces and mercenaries already arrived in the city of Donetsk, according to Ukrainian intelligence. All, it looks like, designed to sort of prompt Ukraine into action. And so far, Ukraine is holding back. But the warning from Boris Johnson and from other world leaders this weekend is very much that this has already started happening, that a full-scale invasion is not yet certain, but it looks incredibly likely. And underneath it all, as Chris and others in other newspapers report, is a very real human story. Hundreds of thousands, millions of lives of people in Ukraine who are incredibly concerned about their futures.
44 million people living in Ukraine, and you've got more on that in the Sunday Telegraph.
Yes, and as Pippa says, there's lots of uncertainty, but the mood music is not good. But the Sunday Telegraph is looking at how actually we could start to feel Russian aggression here in the UK. So Britain warned of cyber attacks as Russia flexes military might. And this is GCHQ head, but also Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, saying that we could start to see cyber attacks here, given that the UK has been so vocal, also in terms of some of its actions on Ukraine, we could be a prime target. And there's been briefings and suggestions that these big companies, food companies, utility companies need to strengthen their cyber defences. And I think it does point to the fact that this may feel as it's not our country, it's further away, but this is going to be bad news for everyone. And I think you could start to see a situation where also I think if you think about sanctions, if we do that, we could start to feel the adverse effect back here, where everyone starts to feel, I suppose, the difficulties of this, Ukraine and UK.
Absolutely. We will, of course, be hearing more about that from the Prime Minister shortly. Storm Eunice as well in the papers. A lot of the papers, obviously. This one we're looking at in the Sunday Times, some dramatic pictures.
Yeah, very dramatic pictures, and anybody that has been out and about over the last couple of days rather than holing up at home will have really understood the full dramatic nature of the storm as it blasted its way across the UK. I mean, incredible pictures there of trees falling down into houses, wrecking houses. And of course, those are not isolated incidents. They happened right across with storm winds of up to 122 miles an hour. And while that has settled down a bit, it's still, as your weather reporters will have no doubt told us, pretty stormy out there. Lots of rain, more gusts, 50 miles an hour gusts, and transport network obviously is being impacted by that and will continue to be impacted by that, trains and ferries and so on. But crucially, there is still 150,000 homes without power. Now, cast your minds back just to the beginning of December and Storm Arwen, and the fact that there was a million homes after Storm Arwen for days that didn't have any power. And big questions were asked. There was an Ofgem report into why the power wasn't restored quicker, whether it's been because of damage to the networks or because of the response from the power companies. I think you can expect similar questions to be asked now. It was only a month or so ago, or 2 months ago, but lessons don't appear to be learnt yet. And for those people that are without power and possibly facing more bad weather conditions over the coming days, it's a pretty miserable place to be.
And the man who became a bit of a star during that storm, this is the Big Jet TV. You were watching, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I mean, obviously the storm's created a lot of difficulties, but there was a small, I think, ray of light, or at least a nice distraction on Friday, where Jerry Dyer, who is the creator of Big Jet TV, was offering a running commentary as all these planes tried to land at Heathrow. And I was one of, I think actually more than 6.7 million people who tuned in. So clearly he was doing something right as he talked us through, whether they'd have to recircle or land. It's captivating TV, but it's quite heartwarming talking about his pilot father who got him involved in the first place. And you would imagine that, I mean, I doubt he'll get that figure of viewers every day going forward, but some of those people, perhaps myself, will go back from time to time.
The Sunday Express, we've got the story about Boris Johnson axing all COVID rules as their headline this morning. This is obviously what's coming up next week, and an announcement that most of it will be dropped. Yes, and I mean, we got wind of this ahead of recess. The Prime Minister at PMQs announced that he was axing all COVID restrictions. At the time was under siege over Partygate, and I think he was really trying to rally his troops with what Number 10 sees as a good news announcement. But clearly, as we get to that point, we're going to now learn what the government views as living with COVID, and we are expecting things like self-isolation to go, but there will be heavy guidance in place, so it might not quite be the big bang we think it is, and also in things like access to tests, travel, this might not be everything going at once. It could be more staged. And I think what will be interesting this week is when we see Boris Johnson talking about this. We expect probably a press conference. Will his Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, have the same level of enthusiasm as Boris Johnson? Or are we going to start to see, perhaps visually, some of the murmurs of discontent we're hearing behind the scenes, and not everyone thinks we should be going this fast? I was very struck yesterday when I was interviewing Boris Johnson in Munich, how strict the rules are there, and a mask, and you have to show your ID and a vaccine pass. Just go and get a coffee, takeaway coffee. Very, very different. And Pippa, let's talk about the story in the Sunday Times. The shadow cabinet is their headline in this investigation.
Yeah, so over the months of the Boris Johnson administration, we've heard various stories about different levels of advisory board, the access that can be effectively bought to government by senior party donors. You know, so if you pay a certain amount of money, you might have dinner with a cabinet minister or something like that. It's not a new phenomenon. Parties have always been keen to raise money from their big donors, and if that means having these sort of more social events, then that kind of is considered acceptable at Westminster. But the difference about this, and the story by Gabriel Pogrund and Henry Zeffman, is that this advisory board isn't. It looks like these very, very wealthy donors, there's about a dozen of them listed in the paper, were given a degree of access to government business, and that raises very serious questions about cash for access. The Conservative Party, obviously, at the moment is already facing all sorts of questions about its donors. There was a lot of stories about that in the autumn. This group of ultra wealthy donors had conversations with Edward Lister, who was Boris Johnson's chief strategic advisor, interestingly, on the day of May the 15th, 2020, when one of the pictures was taken of the PM
on the terrace,
in the garden, the wine and cheese in the garden. At the same time, Eddie Lister was inside sitting down with a Zoom call with many of these wealthy advisors, and they claim, this source tells the Sunday Times, that it was implied that what we said would go straight up to the PM. It was a two-way street. They gave us information of what was going on. We gave our advice.
Katy, last word from you.
Yeah, I mean, this will reopen the debate over Tory funding, but there's one man who is really mentioned many times, and that is the co-Tory chairman, Ben Elliott, a close ally of the Prime Minister, very well connected. He is the nephew of the Duchess of Cornwall. And here it says, even allies of Elliott accept he has adopted a high-risk, can-do approach towards elite donors and their requests. I think we're going to see more pressure on Elliott going forward.
And Pippa, very quickly, the curling overnight.
This is great news. Britain has won its first gold at the Winter Olympics in China, and it's the women's young talent coming up.
Great. Well, some medals at last. Thank you both. And you're also going to be back with me at the end of the programme. But now, Eunice was one of the worst storms to hit the UK in decades, and the work to repair the damage continues. So, are we out of the woods, or is there more to come? Darren Bett, tell us.
Oh dear, Sophie, there's more to come. The weather is going to be getting worse, actually. At the moment, we've got yellow weather warnings from the Met Office for strong winds that will develop more widely through today and continue into tomorrow, and some heavy rain. We've already had 80 millimetres of rain in the Lake District. Some more very wet weather across northern England and Wales. It should turn more showery through the day across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Those showers turning wintry over the high ground. That wetter weather pushing its way further south across England and Wales. And all the while, the winds are strengthening, widely gusting 50, 60 miles an hour this afternoon, maybe a bit stronger around some of these western coasts of England and Wales. It gets colder as it turns brighter and more showery in Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's mild, it's wet and it's windy for England and Wales. Some squally winds for a while as that rain sweeps its way through, and then some snow follows in Scotland. Some rain and hail snow then sweeps its way down across northern areas, and the winds strengthen even further, particularly in Northern Ireland. Could get gusts of 70 miles an hour or more, perhaps, just for a short while overnight. It will be a bit colder tonight. We start with some wetter weather across northern England, Wales and the Midlands. That sweeps its way through, and then we get some sunshine arriving, a scattering of showers around too. The winds turn direction to more of a northwesterly. It's still going to be windy during tomorrow. The winds do gradually ease down a bit, and we'll see temperatures of around 8 to 13 Celsius. Feeling colder in the winds, but some nasty weather on the way, certainly. Sophie.
Darren, thank you. Now, tomorrow, the Prime Minister will announce his plan for living with COVID in England, ending most of the remaining restrictions on freedoms that have been with us throughout the pandemic. The legal requirement to self-isolate if you have COVID will go to be replaced by guidance and personal responsibility. So will the Labour Party back him? I'm joined by Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting. Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you support this government's decision to end legal requirement to self-isolate if you test positive for COVID?
Well, as you said there, it seems that the government is going to still issue guidance telling people they should isolate if they're positive. The key thing is people need to know. So I'm very worried by the reports that the Prime Minister's planning to end free access to testing, because as we've seen throughout the pandemic, and we particularly saw over the Christmas and New Year period, people are keen to do the right thing, whether to protect family members, particularly older or clinically extremely vulnerable family members, but also to be responsible to their co-workers, friends. So we know that testing is popular. It's a crucial defence, and ending free testing now is a bit like being 2-1 up with 10 minutes left of play and taking your best defender off the pitch.
But do you support the government's decision to end the legal requirement to self-isolate?
At this stage, I mean, we don't want restrictions to be in place longer than is necessary,
So
which is why we published our plan for living well with COVID back in January.
Yes or no?
At this stage, I think at this stage, the Prime Minister risks muddying the waters, and so we want to see the government publish the scientific advice, because at the moment this seems very premature. It seems like Boris Johnson is keen to declare victory before the war is over, in the hopes he gets some headlines about, Victory Day on COVID, instead of police officers asking questions about actions in number 10.
But I'm still not clear whether you think they're doing the right thing. Do you support the fact that they're not going to continue with this legal requirement to self-isolate?
At this stage, it doesn't seem responsible to, on one hand, go for all these headlines saying we're ending the legal requirement to stay at home, but on the other hand say, but there's guidance that you should still do that, at the same time as removing the testing. So the question about whether it's a legal requirement, whether it's guidance, is a largely secondary issue. The key thing is that people have access to free testing, they know their status, and they do the right thing by staying at home, which means they also need access to the right level of sick pay to do the right thing. And frankly, it's negligent that the government haven't acted already on that issue too.
But it is a very crucial point, isn't it? It's a big moment if you stop the legal requirement to self-isolate. So if you...
It is a big moment. I think we want to see the scientific advice behind it, because I'm not clear that scientists are calling for it.
OK, so you don't think it's the right thing to do right now?
Well, our position all the way through has been to follow the science, work constructively with the government where we can. I'm not clear that the scientific advice supports this. The Prime Minister's got 24 hours or so before he makes his statement to convince us. So you should ask him when he comes on what scientific advice he's following in order to make this decision. If he's following scientific advice, the Labour Party will do the same. If he's deviating from the scientific advice, then he can't count on Labour support.
You know what the scientific advice as well is. And so if you were Health Secretary now, if you were Prime Minister now, would you be ending this requirement or not?
Well, two things. I don't think it's right that we should effectively declare victory before the war is won and have a free-for-all where people don't know their status and aren't required to stay at home even if they do test positive. That's the wrong thing to do right now. There's a broader issue about how you live well with COVID, which is a whole strategy. We published ours in January, and we'll see if the government's matches up tomorrow. But we published a plan which was about the sensible mitigations we need to put in place, both to exit the pandemic safely, but also prepare us for the risk of future variants, new variants, which may be harmful and present a risk. And so that's a whole range of things which don't impact on people's lives, livelihoods or liberties, but would be sensible precautions and defences to exit the pandemic safely, but also prepare us for the risk of future dangerous variants.
I just want to be really clear about this. I mean, this is what the NHS Confederation, they speak for the NHS. 75% of senior staff in England don't want self-isolation rules to end. The British Medical Association, the decision to remove all restrictions is not based on current evidence and is premature. The World Health Organization, I think, is very unwise indeed. I really don't understand why it's being introduced at the moment. So if you're following the science, if that's
look, to be crystal clear about this, I'm sorry if I'm not being clear already, we would stand with the NHS Confederation, the World Health Organization and the scientific advice over Boris Johnson any day of the week and twice on Sunday. Of course we would. So the question you should ask Boris Johnson in a short while is what advice is he following? What's the scientific basis for making this decision? Because if he's not got any new evidence to show us, if there's no scientific opinion that supports it, he can't count on Labour support. I think that's clear.
OK, so you are going to oppose the government on this then? You do not agree with the government. That's what I'm trying to get to. You don't agree with the government that they are going to end
at this stage, it's not the right thing to do. And I think you've got to be kind of tough on the Prime Minister here, because on one hand he's saying we want to end the legal requirements in order to declare victory on COVID and get some headlines that aren't about the police knocking on the door of number 10. But on the other hand, he's saying, oh, but the guidance is you should still stay at home, but I'm not going to give you access to free tests in order to make the right and informed decisions. And I'm not going to provide a level of sick pay to make sure that you're not forced to choose between doing the right thing by public health or doing the right thing by putting food on the table for your family. So, I do think there are glaring inconsistencies here in the government's approach. And it does seem to me that the whole decision-making process in Number 10 at the moment is being driven by the Prime Minister's political weakness, not by public health, and that should concern all of us.
Let's talk about the Labour Party. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, said this week that police officers should shoot terrorists and ask questions second. Is Labour now a shoot first, ask questions later party?
Well, she didn't say it this week. She said it in an interview with Matt Ford some time ago,
week, yeah.
and very clearly in the context of where you have a live terrorist threat. You know, of course, police officers should take immediate action, potentially fatal action, if it saves the lives of others. And look, I make no apology for that, and neither does Angela Rayner, neither does the Labour Party. We are very clear about where we stand on tough action on terrorism and doing the right thing to protect the lives of others. And that's the context in which Angela made those remarks.
So she was right. She was right to say that.
Of course, I think it's plainly obvious, isn't it? If you've got I mean, look, Angela's a Greater Manchester MP, and we remember what happened in that terrible suicide bombing at the Ariana Grande concert. If a police officer, an armed police officer, has an opportunity to shoot a terrorist in order to save the lives of others, of course they should pull the trigger.
Do you agree with your Shadow Justice Secretary, Steve Reed, that Corbyn's Labour cared more about criminals than victims?
Well, I think that's the perception that took hold, bluntly, that Labour was seen as not strong enough on crime, which is a terrible position to be in, partly because Labour's got a very strong record on crime and policing. Look back to the days of tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. And you know, crime is an issue that affects communities up and down the country, which ought to be at the heart of Labour's concern, particularly on issues like antisocial behaviour. So I think people can judge from this the next Labour government will be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime.
Is this all part of a deliberate drive to show people that Corbynism is dead?
I think the important thing is we show the voters that we got the message when they inflicted the worst defeat on the Labour Party since 1935. And it would be supremely arrogant for the Labour Party to say to the voters, thanks for the kicking you gave us, but we've decided we're still right, you were wrong, and we're not going to change. So the positions that we've just discussed, whether on tough action on terrorism or action to protect communities from antisocial behaviour and other crime, I would describe as mainstream, traditional Labour positions that sadly we deviated from for about 5 years or so, and we're back to that place that people expect the Labour Party, demand the Labour Party be in, of taking tough action on crime.
When Keir Starmer ran for Labour leader, he did promise to bring the movement together and to retain the radicalism of the last 4 years. He's gone back on that, hasn't he?
No, we've got really big challenges, particularly coming out of the pandemic, and it requires big answers, whether it's, you know, the threat of climate change, and look at the images we've seen with the storms this week, look at what happened with the fires in Greece, issues around the world. Labour has got a really bold and ambitious programme for climate change adaptations, mitigations. It's the most ambitious programme put forward by any party. We've got bold, radical ideas, but they're also credible, believable and rooted in Labour's mainstream tradition that has carried right through like a golden thread from the government of Clement Attlee through to Harold Wilson, through to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and that's the mainstream Labour tradition that will be making an offer to the country at the next election.
Wes Streeting, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, a new series of Inside Culture with Mary Beard starts this Friday on BBC Two. The first episode explores how women have been viewed in stories and images over thousands of years and asks what that means for those in positions of power today. While looking for an answer, she spoke to women who have reached the highest levels of politics, including the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard. Well, I'm delighted to say Dame Mary Beard joins me now. Good morning.
Hello.
Hello. Tell us more about the series. I mean, you talk about stereotyping of women and how deeply ingrained it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a cliche now, I think, to say that there's very little there's very little template to mirror if you want to be a powerful woman, you know, except to be a man. So people talk about, you know, Angela Merkel and Hillary Clinton adopting their pantsuits and Margaret Thatcher lowering her voice. And we think that's partly true, but we try to kind of poke at it a bit. I mean, we're not having a whinge fest of powerful women moaning about how terrible it is to be powerful women. We're looking at those cliches and those stereotypes and wondering how women have succeeded in adapting them. I mean, one of the people we talked to is Edwina Currie, and she's extremely funny because she says, she was in Parliament when it was first televised, and she said there was a light bulb moment. You know, that all these men were going to look exactly the same, dressed in their grey suits, and you know, the few women that there were, she said, we could stand out. We could put red and pink on, and so we're trying to think about how women can manipulate that, how they are represented. And we also have a great lesson with Adjoa Ando, who was Lady Danbury in Bridgerton, saying, look, this is how you act power.
How you act power. Well, talking of acting power, I mean, there's been lots been made recently, hasn't there, of Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, and how she's been how she's been dressing on a visit to Moscow. What does that say about her?
It says, I'm Thatcher. I mean, if you look through the photos of Liz Truss, and you know, I don't object to this. I mean, all power to her if that's what she wants to do. But it's very definitely trying to pick out a version of female power that worked, and try to make it work for her. You know, and Thatcher was partly very, very male, and she did lower her voice, but she was quite clever because she retained little signifiers of being female. So the handbag became a symbol of female power in Thatcher's hands.
I'm very interested as well in something else you look at in the series, which is about crying. Yes. Women crying. And you talk to Emma Thompson, don't you? And she tells you how to cry.
Yeah, well, she tries to teach me how to be an actor and how to cry on demand. I have to say that I'm completely hopeless. I fail the audition abysmally. But
there she is, doing a very good...
She's brilliant at it.
But what is it that you're looking at? The women and weakness and tears?
No, we're being actually much more upbeat about crying. We're saying, OK, one question we all have, I think, is how do people like Emma Thompson manage to do that? You know, there's an art. But also, when we go to the cinema to look at a weekly, what are we going for? What films do make us cry? And is it, you know, is that good, or is that a bit sort of over-sentimental? And who cries at films? And so we sit in a cinema and look at things like the end of The Sound of Music, which I have to say is a film which can be guaranteed to make me cry. I might be a real kind of toughy female academic, but, you know, give me the end of The Sound of Music and I'm pouring buckets. And so we talk about why, when that's good for us, we talk about the sheer pleasure of going to a darkened cinema in comfy seats. You're sorted with other people, but you're also on your own. And you're not watching great art. You're not watching Shakespeare or Schiller. You're watching The Sound of Music and you're having a good cry. And, you know, it works every time. And why does it work? And isn't it just wonderful? And you go out, you kind of look around you and see if everybody else has been crying, and you kind of, you know, I don't have to worry.
The power of tears.
The power of tears, you know, and some people are adjusting their eye makeup, not me, but, there's something very important about that kind of letting it all out.
It's all right to cry. Is that the message we're going to get from your programme?
I think it's...
Well, it sounds fascinating, and it's on BBC Two on Friday, first one. Yeah. You're talking to lots of very powerful women, and it's an interesting insight. Mary, thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you, Sophie.
Now, the West continues to warn that Russia could invade Ukraine imminently. Yesterday, Boris Johnson told a security conference in Munich that the omens are grim and that an attack on the country would echo around the world. I sat down with the Prime Minister after his speech and asked him how soon an invasion could happen.
I'm afraid that is what the evidence points to, Sophie, and there's no burnishing it, there's no hiding it. The fact is that all the signs are that the plan has already, in some senses, begun. That's what our American friends think, and you're seeing these provocations now in Donbass. You're starting to see these explosions and so on that we've been warning about for a long time. And I'm afraid to say that the plan that we're seeing is for something that could be really the biggest war in Europe since 1945, just in terms of sheer scale. You're looking at not just an invasion through the east, through the Donbass, but according to the intelligence that we're seeing, coming down from the north, down from Belarus, and actually encircling Kiev itself, as Joe Biden explained to a lot of us last night. And I think people need to understand the sheer cost in human life that could entail, not just for Ukrainians, but also for Russians and for young Russians. And that was the point that I was trying to make earlier on in my speech today.
President Putin has around 150,000 troops massed on those borders. He has the attention of every Western leader already. There are already questions about whether Ukraine could ever join NATO. Hasn't he won already?
I think that he's certainly got everybody fixated on this question, but no, he hasn't, because what matters is the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine. And ultimately, that is still for Ukrainians to determine. And what we don't want to see is a violent invasion that would take away one of the most important gains of my lifetime, which was the creation of a Europe whole and free, where, you remember in 1989, 1990, when the Berlin Wall fell, and there was this extraordinary, intoxicating moment when suddenly countries could choose their own destiny. And it is still the right of the Ukrainian people to decide what alliance they want to join, where they want to go, what their aspirations should be.
They don't have much choice.
And that will be extinguished.
They don't have much choice, though. If President Putin decides to invade Ukraine, they've got no military support. The West has been very clear that if the Russians invade, the West are not going to be in there fighting with them. Well,
what the West has also said, and what the UK has said, is that we will support to the extent that we can, and we've been already giving them training through Operation Orbital, as you know. We've trained 22,000 Ukrainian troops.
And we've taken those soldiers out again.
But there, the 22,000 people who've been trained. We've given them 2,000 anti-tank weapons, the NLAWs, as you know, and plus some other stuff.
It's not enough against the Russian army, though, is it?
We're joining the Lithuanians and the Americans and others in helping them in that respect. But your fundamental point is right. It is true to say that in 2008, from the West, NATO could have made a decision to put Ukraine firmly on the path towards NATO membership. That didn't happen, and the Article 5 security guarantee isn't there. So we have to use the tools that we have, and those tools are economic sanctions against Russia, and the role of the UK has been to make sure that we impose the toughest possible sanctions, and that's what we're going to do, not just hitting the associates of Vladimir Putin, but also all companies, organizations of strategic importance to Russia. We're going to stop Russian companies raising money on UK markets, and we're even with our American friends going to stop them trading in pounds and dollars. That will hit very, very hard.
But it's going to take time, though, for that to hit hard, isn't it? And even our own Intelligence and Security Committee says that Russians with links to President Putin are so well integrated into our business and social scene in the UK, it's almost impossible to untangle.
That's why we're making sure that we expose the ownership of the companies, and with the register of beneficial interest, we're making sure that we open up the Russian doll of property ownership, of company ownership in London, and see who's behind everything. And we've got to do it, and we've got to hit very hard. Now, I've got to be absolutely frank with you, that may not be enough on its own. It will be very damaging and very difficult. What I don't think is well enough but it may not be enough to deter an irrational actor. And we have to accept at the moment that Vladimir Putin is possibly thinking illogically about this and doesn't see the disaster ahead. And I think it's vital for us all now to get over what a catastrophe it would be for Russia. People forget that Ukraine has already been engaged in conflict with Russians or Russian separatists in the east of the country for 8 years now. They've lost 14,000 people in the course of that conflict. They are inured to violence. They know about fighting. I believe that they will fight. I believe it will be a bloody and a protracted conflict. And what I would say to President Putin is, now is the moment to pull back. Now is the moment to engage in serious diplomatic conversation.
A bloody conflict, you say, but the message to Ukrainians is that if he does invade, they will be on their own. President Zelensky has accused the West today of appeasement.
I don't think that that's fair. I think that what we're trying to do is offer every possible support to Ukraine and to make sure that we hit Russia with the hardest possible package of economic sanctions, that we continue to offer support as we have to Ukraine and to Ukrainians, massive package of economic support that we've given, rising to 100 million now. And of course, vital point, what we're also doing is fortifying the eastern flank of NATO. So I think in Putin's imagination, a lot of his anxiety is about NATO and what he sees as the encroachment of NATO since the end of the Cold War. And I think what he wants to see is NATO pushed back. And he's going to see the exact opposite. What we're doing is putting UK forces, more UK forces into Estonia, more into Poland, more in the skies above Romania. If he thinks he's going to get less NATO as a result of this, he's totally wrong. He's going to get more NATO.
But he's not going to get more NATO soldiers into Ukraine. You said today that you have said that the shock of a Ukrainian invasion will echo around the world. Does that mean that you think that if Russia invades Ukraine, it could spill further, that they could invade other countries?
I think that it's very important that we still don't know what's going to happen. There's one person who knows what's going to happen. You asked at the beginning, is an invasion now inevitable? I can't look into the mind of Vladimir Putin. I can't peer into his soul. It's all down to him. But if he goes ahead and invades a sovereign European country, if he imposes maximum violence on Ukraine and at least temporarily succeeds, then that will be seen around the world. And I'm afraid people will draw the false conclusion that might is right and that aggression pays. And so what we've got to ensure is that it doesn't pay off. And even if a lightning war is initially successful, that over time, through our economic might, through all the pressure we can bring, we make sure that this venture does not succeed.
I need to ask you about something else serious that you're having to deal with at home. You have handed in your questionnaire to the Metropolitan Police about parties during lockdown in Downing Street, in government. What did you tell them?
I absolutely promise you, Sophie, as soon as I have something more to say about this matter, I will do so. But I can't give a running commentary of any kind, and it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be right to do so. But as soon as I am able to say something, I assure you, you will be amongst the very first to know.
But if the police find that you have broken the law, broken your own laws that you wrote, will you resign?
Can I just undertake to make sure that as soon as I have something meaningful to say about this, which will be at the end of the process, I will make sure I do it to you, to the BBC, and I'll have a lot more to say about this in due course.
But it's not something that is being investigated. I'm asking you as a point of principle. You wrote those laws. You told the nation to abide by them. You went on television night after night and told them to abide by them. If you are found to have broken them, broken your own laws,
I understand the
will
question.
you stay in your job?
I understand the question you're raising, but any answer would be interpreted as a point of commentary about the process. I've got to leave.
It's a matter of principle, surely. It's not a point of commentary.
I've got to leave. You must forgive me. I can't comment about a process that's currently underway, and I won't.
It isn't a process underway. It's something in the future. The police are looking at something that has happened. I'm asking you about something that is in the future, because once the police come back and they tell us what happened and whether or not you broke the law, whether or not you will be fined, at that point you will have to decide.
Nothing would give me greater pleasure than to give you full and detailed answers to all this stuff. I genuinely can't, because we've got a process underway. There is not a jot I can say until it's done.
You can answer it though. I mean, you're choosing not to. It doesn't prejudice anything. The police, there's no jury involved. There's not a court trial. It's the police. It's a process, and you have handed in your questionnaire, so that is done. But you're obviously choosing not to. Were there parties in your flat during lockdown?
Can I just respectfully, humbly, and with all, I can't say anything more about this until the process is complete. It will be complete in, I hope, a reasonably short time. In the meantime, what we're focused on is, and quite ruthlessly, is trying to bring the world together at an absolutely critical moment here in Munich at the security conference, where a lot of people are meeting, to make sure that we have a united Western posture on the number one crisis in Europe, which is the threat to Ukraine.
Absolutely, but we have spoken about Ukraine. But you are the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and you're currently being investigated by the police. You have spoken about this in the Commons, for example, where you told MPs that all guidance was followed completely by Number 10. Do you still stand by that?
Sophie,
do you still stand by that?
We have a...
It's a simple question. It doesn't influence...
I know, I understand completely. We have a process that's underway. I've got to respect that. And in the meantime, we've got to get on not just with tackling what's going on in Ukraine. We've got to get on and delivering all the things that the British public want us to do. We've got to make sure that we bounce back from COVID properly.
But the reason I'm asking you that is because you've always... and I'm going to talk to you about... And I am going to talk to you... And I will talk to you about COVID, but it is a serious matter. You are being investigated, you're Prime Minister, as I say, and we haven't had much opportunity to ask you about it, which is why I'm asking you about it now. And I think people do find some of your explanations implausible. That lockdown drinks party in Downing Street, May 20, 2020, it was 8 weeks into the first lockdown, and you went to that and you spent 25 minutes there. You told MPs that you implicitly believed it was a work event. People just don't understand how that could be.
I know, and I know you've got to ask these questions, but you're just going to have to wait until the process is complete. Literally not a bean I can tell you about that, and much as I would like to. What I think people might also be interested, and I appreciate that they're interested in that, there's just nothing I can say about it. What I think people are also interested in is what we are doing to move beyond COVID.
Why can't you say anything about it?
All the things we're doing to open up our economy, which I'll be outlining tomorrow, all the things that we're doing to make sure that we beat the COVID backlogs, that we bounce back as fast and effectively as possible, all the things that we're doing to bear down on crime and to unite and level up across the UK.
But you're not going to prejudice just by answering these questions. And as I say, we have not had much opportunity to ask you about them. Just by answering these questions, you're not going to prejudice the outcome of any police investigation. It is all done. Theresa May has said that either you didn't understand the rules that you wrote, or you just think they didn't apply to you. Which is it?
I'm afraid that I just have to focus on the stuff that we're focusing on, and that is making sure that we avert a tragedy in Ukraine, making sure that we move beyond COVID effectively, making sure that we deliver on all the promises that we made.
But it is important to talk about this.
And I understand why you want to ask about this.
But the image of the Queen, let me just ask you about the Queen. That image of the Queen at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, there she was all on her own. She was following the rules. The nation was following the rules, and people don't understand why people in Downing Street weren't following the rules.
I understand why.
But it was really embarrassing. You had to apologise to the Queen.
Of course, I understand why people want to ask about. I understand your curiosity. I totally accept it. But you're just going to have to accept for the time being. You won't have long, all right? I hope. But for the time being, you're simply going to have to contain your interest in this.
You must have been very ashamed of that moment. That image of the Queen, you must have felt ashamed of that.
I will be saying a lot more about it in due course. But in the meantime, what we are focused on, and I think this is absolutely crucial for the future of the world, including the UK, is making sure that we do everything we can right now to protect a sovereign, independent European country from attack, violent and potentially devastating attack, that we do everything we can to take our country forward with a fantastic programme of investment, uniting and levelling up, fighting crime, encouraging people down the path of home ownership, investing in our country and in our society. And if you want to talk about the things that are going on at home, we are in the fortunate position. We're here in Germany, where they've done a wonderful job of fighting COVID. But the fact is that because of the vaccine rollout that we had in the UK, we've been able to come out faster from that pandemic than any other European country. We've been able to get on with reopening our economy so well that we have the fastest growth in the G7, not just for 21, but also
we
for
fell
22.
further than anybody else at the start, didn't we, as you know?
Also for 22. We have unemployment virtually at record lows. We have youth unemployment definitely at record lows, and you have a government that is absolutely bursting with energy and enthusiasm. Energy and enthusiasm, yes, to answer your questions in due course, Sophie, but above all, to get on with our programme.
Okay,
and
but
we were elected on a massive manifesto.
You are here on the world stage.
And that is what we're doing.
And here you are on the world stage, but back at home you are being investigated by the police. You've got MPs calling for you to resign. You're living under the constant threat of a no confidence vote. Do you not think you're just burying your head in the sand over this?
I am fortunate to live in a democracy. I am fortunate to be the Prime Minister of a free, independent, democratic country where people can take that sort of decision and where I do face that kind of pressure. That's a wonderful thing. And what we're trying to do now is make sure that the people of Ukraine have that continued freedom and that they are able to continue to live in a democracy. And that's what matters to me, quite frankly. And I think that the UK, if you look back at what we've done over the last few months, we were among the first to send defensive weaponry to Ukraine. We were among the first to call out the plans of the Kremlin and to sound the warning about how severe it could be. We were the first to say that we really needed a very tough package of economic sanctions. And that is what we've got to do now. We've got to make sure that the world learns the lessons of 2014. And the lesson of 2014 is that you can't just let Vladimir Putin get away with it, and also that you can't continue your dependence on hydrocarbons. And the tragedy is that too many countries in Europe remain absolutely mainlining Russian oil and gas. And we need to wean ourselves off that.
I think a lot of people
the UK, we have as you've said, we have an issue with Russian money in the city, and we've got to deal with that. But the much bigger issue.
And there are going to be lessons that will be learned quite clearly. There will be lessons, and there are going to be lessons.
Opportunity now for the whole of Europe to change what they're doing.
But there are going to be lessons quite clearly learned from Sue Gray's report when we see it in its entirety.
Yes,
we've only seen it in an update so far. But at the moment, you know, we don't even know what the police are looking at the moment. But at the moment, your poll ratings, I mean, you're as unpopular as John Major was. It's been damaging for your party, hasn't it? And hugely distracting.
But just to return to my earlier point, it is a privilege to serve in a democracy. And quite frankly, here in Munich at the International Security Conference, what people see when they look at Britain is a country that has brought the world together in having a tough stance on Vladimir Putin, that has been right. We've been vindicated in our anxieties about what's going on. We've led in supporting the people of Ukraine, and we will continue to offer leadership. We're the second biggest military player in NATO. We've massively increased our defence funding. We're in the P5.
I want to ask you about COVID.
And we are going to continue to do everything we can, because the risks are enormous right now, but what we want to see is continued stability and continued growth, prosperity for the British people.
I want to ask you what's coming up about COVID in the next week in England, but can I just ask you one question about Prince Andrew first of all? Is any public money going to be used in Prince Andrew's settlement with Virginia Giuffre?
Well, what I can tell you, I can't answer your questions about the process that's going on, the police process that's going on, and I certainly can't answer questions about the royal family.
But do you think public money should be used?
No Prime Minister.
But should public money be used?
No Prime Minister ever answers questions.
But should public money be used in his settlement?
No Prime Minister ever answers questions about the royal family, and quite right.
It's public money, though.
No, look, you know, That's for you. It's not my job to answer questions about the royal family.
Let's talk about COVID. The people who run the NHS say it's too soon to scrap mandatory self-isolation for people who test positive for COVID and to scrap free COVID tests. Why are you ignoring them?
I think it's very important we should remain careful, and we're certainly not asking people to throw caution to the winds. COVID remains, a dangerous disease, particularly if you haven't been vaccinated, and particularly if you're vulnerable. So please, everybody, there are still people who haven't been properly vaccinated. There's still people who haven't had their booster. Huge numbers have, but there are still people who haven't. So there is no case for complacency about this. But we've now reached a stage, thanks to the efficacy of the vaccine rollout, particularly the booster rollout, which we did voluntarily, by the way. If you compare most other European countries, it was amazing what the British people did. We've reached a stage where we think you can shift the balance away from state mandation, away from banning certain courses of action, compelling certain courses of action, in favour of encouraging personal responsibility.
Is there a risk that we lose the early warning signs by getting rid of free testing?
I want to make sure that we have capability to spot stuff and to snap back up as fast as we
What does that mean, capability?
I think we need resilience, but we don't need to keep, for instance, on testing, we don't need to keep spending at a rate of £2 billion a month, which is what we were doing in January.
But how are we going to spot it if we're not testing?
Because we will be testing at a much lower level, but I'm afraid what we can't do is continue with as the number of cases diminishes, and certainly the number of patients in hospital is thankfully coming down now, and the number of cases in ICU certainly way down. We're in a different world.
Do you rule out ever having?
And I think it is important that people should feel confident again, and that people should feel able to go back to work in the normal way. I do want to see our country really getting back on its feet, and the economic figures, as I said to you, are very encouraging. That's what we want, and we want the country. Plenty of businesses are investing. Plenty of international businesses are investing massively in the UK. I'm not saying that we should throw caution to the winds, but now's the moment for everybody to get their confidence back.
Have we seen the end of restrictions in England, at least? Will we never have to live under restrictions again for COVID?
I don't want to go back to that kind of non-pharmaceutical intervention. I want to be able to address the problems of the pandemic with a vaccine-led approach. That's what I want. But I'm afraid you've got to be humble, as I've often said. You've got to be humble in the face of nature.
Is one of the problems, though? I mean, if another variant came along, that it would be very hard for you to stand in front of a podium, go on national television, make big public addresses, and ask people to make huge personal sacrifices again, because would they actually follow the rules?
I think the amazing thing about the UK population is the way we've all worked together, the way people have got vaccinated, the way that people have done the right thing, and it's been absolutely spectacular.
But after everything that's gone on in Downing Street and the investigation into lockdown parties, I'm just asking whether people would ever follow the rules again.
Great respect. Okay, 2 points. First of all, I'll answer all that when the time comes on that point. But on would people obey the rules? Will people look after themselves and other people? Look at the evidence. Look at what British people have done, and look at the way by getting vaccinated in the scale and pace that they did, everybody collectively helped to save lots and lots of lives. And I think that people's actions were fantastic. And so I'm very encouraged by what they did. But now is the time, and as I say, I don't want people to get completely the wrong idea. I'm not saying you can totally throw caution to the winds. COVID remains dangerous if you're vulnerable and if you're not vaccinated. But we need people to be much more confident and get back to work.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you.
The Prime Minister speaking to me yesterday afternoon in Munich. Well, let's round this off by talking to the Mirror's Pippa Crerar and the Spectator's Katy Balls again. Pippa, is it a legal or a political decision not to talk about the police investigation and what happens next?
Well, Boris Johnson is clearly, as your interview shows, on more comfortable territory talking about Ukraine and COVID. But as far as I can work out, there's no legal impediment to him talking about what's gone on in the whole Partygate saga. He could be that he's received advice from his lawyers not to incriminate himself further by talking about things beyond which are already in the public domain. But it does seem that he is legally able to, should he want to. The issue here is a political impediment. He doesn't want to be focusing on Partygate. He wants to be focusing on Ukraine, on COVID, on any other domestic issue which comes up, anything which distracts from what has been an incredibly difficult time for his leadership. And I think we'll continue to see him pushing forward, trying to tough it out and not talk about it until he really has no choice. Police report comes back, Sue Gray report comes back, and then he'll have to address the issues. And
Katy, MPs have been off the past week. They're back in Westminster tomorrow. We know that COVID is going to be dominating at the start of the week. What is the mood amongst MPs you talk to?
I think over the past week it sort of seems slightly calmer around Boris Johnson, and people said, oh, you know, his position's improving, but it has been recess, so MPs can't meet, they can't talk to one another, they can't plot. And I think that there is a divide in the Tory party. There are some who think this is not the time to have a leadership contest. Also, they're not particularly delighted by any of the potential candidates, but there are others who are deeply uncomfortable with the whole Partygate saga. And that's why I think looking at whether there is a fine issued against the Prime Minister, and also whether MPs believe that he did mislead Parliament, is going to be quite critical to whether or not we do get a confidence vote and that 54 letters sent in.
And Pippa, you were the first to break this story back in, was it the end of November, the stories about what was going on in Downing Street at some of the parties. Is there more to come? Well,
there's certainly more allegations out there, and if we come across any evidence then that we think is in the public interest, then of course we'll publish them. And as we all know, the police has access to 300 photos and about 500 documents from Sue Gray's own inquiry. So there's a lot of information out there. If we come across it, we'll publish it. But there are these flashpoints that Katy's mentioned. There's a Sue Gray report coming out in full.
Because we've only seen the update, and we've seen very little of it.
And there's the police inquiry and what it decides to do, whether the Prime Minister's issued with a fixed penalty notice and whether the MPs act on the back of that. And also further down the line, this the cost of living, massive cost of living pressures this spring, which would be a very difficult time for the government, even in ordinary circumstances. Plus, of course, the May elections, which might just be the moment that Tory MPs decide that their electoral asset has become an electoral liability. So it's going to be a really difficult spring ahead for the Prime Minister, regardless of the Partygate allegations.
But there are a lot of people, out there who've just had enough of talking about parties anyway. I mean, is there a point at which the public just go, right, move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen the Prime Minister buy himself time, and actually by having these things hang over him, there is space for them to talk about other issues, Ukraine, the end of COVID restrictions. But the issue is, as we saw in the interview, it's still hanging over his head, and it cannot be a good thing while there's so many unanswered questions.
He does seem bullish, though, doesn't he?
Yes, and I think what you saw in that interview is classic Boris Johnson. The approach of this government to difficult issues and difficult questions is to double down, tough it out, obfuscate. We've seen that throughout their time in office, and you're seeing it again here. He is not going to give up power lightly. This is the man that as a boy wanted to be world king. He was going to try and hang on to it. And let's not forget, it's just 2 years since he won a massive majority. You can see why he feels that he's been elected by the people and should therefore be allowed to continue to serve the people. But there are huge pressures facing him in the months ahead. And whether he's able to do that and fulfil that ambition, only time will tell.
And what we have seen in the last few weeks is just how quickly things change in politics, day by day.
Yes, and I think what the Prime Minister is trying to do is, put on this show of strength to actually say to his MPs, you can maybe get the numbers together for a vote, but I don't think you're going to win it. And is hoping, I think loads around him are hoping that's going to put people off from even getting there. Because once you get into confidence votes, we've seen with Theresa May, it does weaken your position and really cast a big shadow on your premiership, even with a large majority.
Katy, Pippa, thank you both for joining me. And thank you to all my guests for joining us this Sunday. I hope you can join me again next Sunday. Goodbye.